Hello class, and welcome back to RSM 236 Rail Signaling Maintenance course. And during this video lecture, I'll be describing the 9 different tests that actually make up a complete locking test. And you can see the 9 different tests listed here on this slide. We have the approach locking test, the time locking test, the signal indication locking test, the route locking test, traffic locking test, switch indication locking test, detector locking test, loss of shunt locking test, and the switch completes throw locking test. So these 9 tests make up the complete locking test to test the functionality and safety of a rail transit system interlocking. So let's talk about the approach locking test first. The approach locking test tests the 3 track circuits in approach of a signal that governs the movement of trains into an interlocking. Now, as you remember, this is an interlocking between the 4 signals that control train movement into and out of this interlocking. So the approach track circuit test is performed to ensure that while a train occupies the approach to a signal and the signal is cleared, which means the signal is green, which means trains can go through, and return to its most restrictive signal, which would be red, that the route cannot be changed or any conflicting route or opposing signals established until the predetermined time interval has elapsed, which is 90 seconds if a route was to be canceled. So that's a long definition, but basically what it means is if a train's coming this way on track 1, if it's going south on track 1, when a train approaches the N1 576T track circuit, the 535-2 signal will automatically upgrade to a green signal. And as the train approaches that signal by going through the N1 565T and N1 552T track circuit, that once it crosses the N1 535AT track circuit, that the 535-2 signal will go red, will switch from green to red. And if the route was to be canceled, that nothing changes until the time expires, which is 90 seconds. That's the approach route circuit. Okay, so next one I'll talk about is time locking. The time locking test basically ensures that once the signal has been cleared and it returned to its most restrictive aspect, that the route cannot be changed nor any conflicting routes or opposing signals be cleared until their predetermined time interval has expired, which is 90 seconds. Now, that sounds familiar, doesn't it? Well, it should, because the time locking test is actually tested during the approach locking test. But the time locking test basically means if a train's traveling down track 1 southbound and it hits the N1 552T track circuit and the N1 535AT track circuit, that the signal goes red. And if you try to cancel the signal, it'll take 90 seconds before the signal can be canceled. That's what that is. The signal indication locking test, that basically means that once a signal is cleared, the switches in the route are locked, the route cannot be changed, nor any conflicting or opposing routes be established. So that's the signal indication locking test. And what that means is once a signal, say a train's going down southbound on track 1 like we talked about just a moment ago, and what the signal indication locking test means, that once the switches are lined and locked, so you can see the auxiliary switch controls in the bottom center of your screen, once the switches are lined and locked, these locked LEDs would be red, but once that it's established, you cannot change the position of any of these track switches, 1A, 3A, 3B, or 1B, and you cannot establish any opposing or conflicting routes. And that's what that test is. Okay, the route locking test. That's pretty simple. The route locking test basically means once a train enters the route track circuits, which we learned about in the previous video lecture, once a train enters the route track circuits, that means that the switches cannot be moved or change position while the train's within the interlocking, within the signals to the interlocking. Okay, so that's what that one is. Traffic locking. Traffic locking is that test is done to ensure that once a traffic block is established, a train cannot be routed into the same traffic block in the opposite direction. So we talked about traffic block track circuits in the first video lecture. So with this one, is once a train has a route established and this traffic is set, so these traffic track circuits are going to be set for the southbound direction, which is the normal direction on track 2, that you cannot send a train up like a mile down the tracks, up track 2, so you have a head-on collision on that track. So that's just not possible. So you have to make sure that's what that test does, and you have to make sure that functionality works within the interlocking. The switch indication locking test, basically that means if you have the 1A or 3A track switches or the 1B or 3B track switches, if these track switches do not show in correspondence, which we talked about before, it's also in your student manual. If the switches are not in correspondence, you cannot get a route through that interlocking. Basically it means if the track switches aren't working correctly, you can't send a train across it, because it'd be a very dangerous situation if you do that, because you don't know what position the track switches are set in, and therefore you don't know which direction the train is going to go. So to prevent a train from even getting into the interlocking, the signals will not go from red to green. They will stay red, which will stop the train from entering the interlocking. Okay, detector locking is next. And detector locking is a test that is performed to ensure that switches cannot be moved when any track circuit within the interlocking is de-energized. So basically what that means is you have the 4 signals that govern the movement of the interlocking. If any of these track circuits within the interlocking are shown occupied, the detector locking test ensures that the switches cannot be moved if there's a train in the interlocking. And that ensures that the switch does not move or change direction while a train is going across the switch. Next we have the loss of shunt. Test number 8 is the loss of shunt. And the loss of shunt test is performed to verify that if any track circuit within the interlocking is shunted, all switches within the interlocking are electrically locked. And once the shunt is removed, the switches remain locked while the loss of shunt timer runs. And the loss of shunt timer is 5 seconds. So basically what that means is if there is a train within the interlocking and for some reason the signaling system was to lose track of where the train is going through the interlocking because the signaling system isn't working properly, that the switches will remain electrically locked, which are the bottom LED, the red LED indicators on the bottom of the maintenance test panel. And they will remain unlocked until the 5-second timer has expired. And then the last test is the switch completes throw. And you can probably picture what that test is. If the track switch begins to move, the switch complete throw test ensures that while a track switch is in transit while it's moving, the track switch, and if the track switch fails or becomes occupied, that the track switch will complete its throw. It'll continue to move. And that's it. That's the 9 tests. So again, refer to your student manuals, refer to the standing operating procedure in your student manuals, and refer to the data sheet in your student manuals. And you'll be able to do pretty good on the discussion questions or the quiz. All right, have a great day.